Hey Internet, this is Alpha Rookie. We're beginning a new series where we're going to start opening up your eye holes to some overlooked comics. These videos will be a little bit more bite-sized in a non-typical Alpha Rookie fashion. We'll keep doing the in-depth stuff, but we wanted a segment where we could kind of quickly one-off some of my favorite books that I think are flying way under the radar. You should be able to watch these while you're waiting for the bus or taking a dump or whatever. I'm kicking off this video series with Guerillas by Brahm Revel, who is the writer and also the artist. Now, we can't use any licensed music without getting in trouble, but if you have Run Through the Jungle by Creedence Clearwater Revival nearby, cue that shit up while you watch for the best viewing experience. Got it? Okay, here we go. This book is a classic in the making, and too many people are sleeping on it. The pitch is easy. Guerillas is a Vietnam War story about a young grunt who finds himself lost and alone in the jungle before running into a government-sponsored experimental platoon of chimpanzee soldiers gone rogue. Sold, right? It's a good hook and an easy sell for a Planet of the Apes nut like myself. The story focuses on John Francis Clayton. He's a disaffected youth who didn't know what to do with his life, and so he joins the military to make his veteran father proud. But John is a far cry from the greatest generation of his father. Of course, he realizes that fact long after entrenching himself in a tropical nightmare and eventually falling in with a group of badass simians more human in some ways than his previous brothers in arms. You might think such a comic booky concept might fall into comedic territory, but Guerillas is equal parts touching, horrific, and provocative, exploring the relationship between man, animal, and war in ways that have me catching my breath, choking back tears, and lingering on pages full of meaning and emotion. Guerillas is first and foremost a sci-fi action page-turner, and when I say action, I mean aspiring artists should take note. As I mentioned before, Revel writes and draws the book, which allows for a degree of control that you may not see with the team. Revel shows a deft hand at conveying scale and perspective so that every action scene makes sense. That's especially difficult to do in a jungle setting where every background could potentially blend together and disorient the reader. He knows when to give us an establishing shot, he knows when to close in, and when to switch POV, and so on. I've heard him in interviews emphasize the importance of thumbnails to the comic book process, like really making sure you're communicating the story visually with power and economy, and it really shows in his work. Basically, don't waste any space on the page. Every frame needs to count. Compare a Revel page to a Jim Lee page and you could see what I mean. Lee is going for the pose, the iconic Zack Snyder fuck yeah shot. If I had to guess, I'd say Revel's thinking is more like, look cool, sure, but what can I do here to get the story of the action across, the story of the character across, or the emotion, or the plot, etc.? I'm not going to try to guess what Jim Lee's thinking process is, but it seems philosophically that he's more interested in making the explosion or the crash look cool than conveying where that crash or explosion is in relation to Superman or Batman or whoever. And that's fine, that's a totally legitimate way of making comic books. In contrast, let's take a look at an action sequence by Brahm Revel. Keep in mind that this action sequence spans multiple pages, but you never lose sight of where each element is in relationship to each other. And that's not an accident, that comes from meticulous planning at the thumbnail stage. The actual artwork might not be super detailed, awesome sauce, sexy town, line work. I like it a lot, but on a functional level, what Revel is doing here is actually really impressive. Okay, first three panels. We get an establishing shot with the Viet Cong in the foreground, with the chimp in the background, heading for the edge of the roof. Then a low angle where our heads fill in the blank of him leaping off the roof. Then a high angle reaction shot from the Viet Cong we saw in the establishing shot. See, he's looking up, he's terrified, we know what he's looking at because of the previous panel where we saw him jumping off the roof. On the next page, we get the payoff panel with the tackle. Then back to establishing to set up the next action beat to show us where the chimp is in relation to two more enemies. Notice here, he already has the chimp's foot in position close to this chicken over here.
Keep fucking that chicken.
And the reason he does that is because now we get a close-up on the foot grabbing the chicken. Here the chicken pays off, and another piece of action winds up with the guy on the left. And then pay off again with the last panel showing he threw the enemy judo style onto his back. Now that's the end of a page, and that would be enough. But my man knows how to string action between pages. Next page, first panel, we haven't forgotten the dude that got chickened, right? So even though that last action sequence was on the previous page and we can't look at it anymore, beginning with this guy with the chicken, it makes us recall all of that information so we can keep going. Now we also have a new chimp running from behind. Next panel introduces another enemy and a goat running in front of him, And in the next panel, we see where his bullets are landing to let us know where that new enemy is in relation to the chimp introduced 2 panels before. We know where the chimp is, we know where the shooter is. Here's the goat again, then wind up again, then big fucking awesome payoff on the next page. I know where the enemy was the whole time, I know where the chimp was the whole time, and I knew where the goat was the whole time. And more than that, I know about how much time it took for everything to take place. Nicely done. It might not seem that impressive when you just read that for the first time, but that's kind of the point. You don't want to be thinking about this stuff. Besides Revel's impressive layouts and compositions, I also have to take my hat off to his character work. When most of your main casts don't talk, you have to communicate through posture and expression, and whatever time he spent studying the chimpanzee form has really paid off. So what's the deal? The series is phenomenal, so why doesn't it have the audience it deserves? Well, Guerillas originally came out as a double-sized image comic priced at $5.99, and this was pre-image boom that we're experiencing right now. The audience for independent comics today was not the audience of just a decade ago. Also, it's black and white, and with the exception of Walking Dead, that typically puts your book at a disadvantage on the stands. A high price tag from an unknown talent and black and white pretty much spelled dead on arrival for Guerillas. However, through Kickstarter and a different publisher, Revel has managed to keep this book alive and hopefully healthy enough for him to complete a masterpiece. Guerillas is all the social commentary and science fiction of Rise of the Planet of the Apes wrapped in a love letter to Apocalypse Now. And if that doesn't sound like you're kind of awesome, then what do you even read comic books for? Guerillas' new home is at Oni Press. You can buy the first 3 volumes at your local comic book store, if they're cool enough to carry it. You could buy it at fine graphic novel retailers like cheapgraphicnovels.com or digitally at Comixology. Whatever you do, don't torrent this book. Revel was already at the brink once and almost stopped making this series. Seriously, if you do anything to take food out of this guy's mouth so he can't finish this series, I will find you.
I don't care who you are back in the world. I'll bleed you real quiet. Leave you here.